gentlemen, please put your hands together for Will Guidara!
All right. How you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm happy to be here. Nice to be here with all of you guys. How's everyone doing this morning? I was watching you backstage. I'm all fired up.
Good, I love it. I was watching you backstage in Vegas. I was fired up. I'm like, I can't wait to talk to him myself with the interview. But Will, just to kind of give you a little context of the audience here, these are business owners, 3,000 business owners or their teammates from 50 plus countries. Some are operators, some are founders, some are investors, but for the most part, they're from nearly 150 industries that they're here, so a lot of different types of business we're talking about. So that's the optics on who we're talking to. But Will, for some people that don't know, what turned me on about you is Josh Abramson, who's one of our clients that we consult for. He comes out and he tells me about your book. I read the book. I can't put the book down. I tell everybody to read this book because it's by far the best book I've ever read on creating culture, customer service, customer experience. A book like that does not exist. Then I tell the Valuetainment audience to read it. Then I did a video that on TikTok went a little bit crazy. And then I'm talking to Adrian from Penguin Portfolio. And I said, Adrian, I got to tell you, man, I just read this book and we have him speaking at the event. And Adrian's the CEO of Portfolio Penguin for Business Book, which is the top name out there for business books. And Adrian says, which book are you talking about? I said, Will Guidara, Unreasonable Hospitality. He says, we published that book. We love that book. I said, dude, everyone's got to read it. So for some that don't know, if you don't mind taking a moment, sharing a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into questions.
Yeah. Well, first I just have to share with you quickly, and I think you guys will all appreciate this. I have two kids, a 2.5-year-old and a 6-month-old. And I've heard from friends who have kids that are a bit older that it doesn't really matter what you do. Your kids aren't that impressed by you until something random happens, and then they're like, oh my gosh, you're a big deal. We're not at that stage yet as a family. So the guys that are the doormen in my building, I'm very close with these guys. They're kids, they're amazing, they're warm, they're driven, and they've never given a crap who I am. And then one day I get home and one of them says, wait, you know Patrick Bet-David? And I was like, well, not really, why? And they're like, we saw this thing on TikTok that he did about your book. And I just want to thank you because of you, my doormen are now impressed by me.
I love that.
My book, Unreasonable Hospitality, it's a story of my career, most specifically about taking 11 Madison Park from a middling brasserie and making it the #1 restaurant in the world. But it's me stating the thesis that I don't care what you do for a living, you can make the choice to be in the hospitality industry simply by making the decision to be as unreasonable about how you make people feel as everyone in this room invariably already is about whatever product you're selling. At its core, the book is about being intentional and creative in pursuit of relationships. The relationships with the people you work with, along with those that you serve. Because what made us #1, it wasn't the excellence of our product. Yes, our product was amazing. But in my view, in this day and age, that's table stakes. I don't care what you do for a living. I don't care how good your product is. Invariably, someone will come along who is smarter, more creative, perhaps has more money, and they will create a better product. We're all looking to create these moats around our business, and my thesis is that the greatest moat you can create is by taking resources, time and money, and investing them in your relationship capital accounts. Because relationships take a long time to build, and if you build them in the right way, the loyalty you gain, that takes a long time to erode. And so the book is really me saying that we became #1 because we were unreasonable in pursuit of hospitality, in pursuit of creating conditions for connection. And I just believe it's a win-win-win that I wanted to share with the world.
I love it, incredible. And it's amazing because you would think it only applies to restaurant, but it applies to every business, every industry. So talking about restaurants, who's worked in hospitality restaurant before, whether you're a busboy or a waiter or waitress or hostess?
There we go.
So the furthest I ever made, just so I want to brag a little bit about myself, I was a chef at Burger King. and I would make the best Whoppers in the world when I was 15, 16 years old.
You were a chef
I was a
at
chef.
Burger King.
I have to say chef. I would put chef on my resume. And the people who would interview me saying, who the hell is a chef? Did you work at headquarters? I said, no, I worked at Glendale brand off of brand. But I was also a busboy at Bob's Big Boy.
Okay.
They never made me a waiter. Broke my heart. Till today, I'm still, struggling with it. But the back end of a restaurant, for some of us that maybe are not operators in the restaurant business, you hear margins are not as high. It's constant service. This food, the steak you brought out, I asked for medium rare. This is well done. Take it back. What about this? What about that? Why is the sauce this way? It could be potentially constant complaining, right? So maybe for some of us that are not in the business, take us back and give us the day-to-day challenges anyone in the restaurant business deals with.
It's funny. Everyone here, I would imagine, has heard something along the lines of the restaurant business is a terrible industry, right? If you want to make $1 million in the restaurant industry, start with $10 million or something like that. And people constantly talk about the challenges appropriately. It's not an easy business to succeed in, but I was on this panel years ago at the James Beard Awards, which is like the restaurant industry's version of the Oscars. And everyone was talking about how hard it is, how hard it is, how hard it is. And eventually, I just jumped in and looked at them. I said, then why are you doing it? Like, yes, it's not easy, but if all you do is talk about how hard it is, then it is going to implicitly be hard. I think we have this ability, all of us as individuals, to look at whatever it is we're doing and look at the things that are difficult as either challenges or opportunities. And I always looked at it in the latter form. Yes, a lot of people can complain in restaurants. You could look at that as a challenge. I look at it as endless opportunities to turn people around. Because in my business, and I think this is true in anyone who does anything in the customer service world, the best regulars are always those that started out unhappy, because if you show that you are willing to do whatever it takes to right a wrong,
wow,
you get loyalty for life. One of my mentors used to say, the path to success is paved with mistakes well handled. In the back, margins are really hard to maintain, but I look at that as a challenge. I don't think you can succeed at anything unless you get excited about the creativity that goes into solving every part of the equation. A lot of people in my business fail because they only get excited about the creative side. But creativity is not limited to just the thing that you serve. It also needs to be extended to how you make that business as profitable as humanly possible. I get excited about the creative process to get 2, 3, 4 more points in the bottom line. It's hot, the days are long, but my gosh, I hope that everyone in the world gets to feel what I feel, which is I cannot imagine doing anything else in the world but what I do. And I wake up every day knowing that it's not going to be easy, but I also don't think it's hard. It just requires trying harder. And I get fired up to try really hard every day.
So the question then becomes, when you're talking unreasonable hospitality, if you can give a couple stories and examples of what that really means, whether it's the hot dog story, whether it's the beer story, whether it's they're on their way to a flight and, hey, here's something on your way to the flight, or we just got married, or I proposed to my girl there. Yes. These are some incredibly creative stories. One, if you mind sharing a couple of those stories. And then two, how do you create a climate for people to be thinking about creative ways to make someone's day?
So this whole idea of unreasonable hospitality, my restaurant ultimately became the #1 restaurant in the world, but the first year we were on that list of the 50 best, we came in last place, which I was a little bit upset about. And I don't know about any of you, but when I'm trying to accomplish something, I look at the people that have accomplished it before me, study them, see what they did, try to figure out what those lessons are, make them my own, and then approach it in my own fresh way. What that list acknowledges is the restaurant that's having the greatest impact on restaurants at any moment. And without exception, everyone that topped that list was unreasonable in their pursuit of the product they were serving. I decided that our impact was going to be focused on being unreasonable in pursuit of people. That's where Unreasonable Hospitality came about. And I remember I went back to my team after that 50 best, and on a cocktail napkin, I had written, "We will be number one," because similar to your visioning statement, my dad gave me this paperweight when I was a kid. It said, "What would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail?" And he'd always tell me to answer that question honestly at varying phases in my life, and whatever the answer was, to try to do that. And he'd always go on to say that far too many people, and this is totally understandable, are scared to say their most audacious goals out loud for fear that if they do and don't achieve them, they'll let themselves and those around them down. But if you don't have the confidence and conviction to dream big out loud, it's unlikely you'll ever achieve your biggest dreams. So I wrote, "We will be number one," and then I wrote Unreasonable Hospitality because, to your point, a goal without a strategy is nothing more than a pipe dream.
How long before you became number one did you write that?
7 years.
7 years before you became number one, you wrote that?
7 years.
So the idea when you wrote it down, did you then go and sell it to your team, or who did you sell it to next?
Yeah, so then I went back to my team and I said, "We are going to be the number one restaurant in the world." And mind you, we were number 50. If we had slipped one place, we were off the list altogether. It's a risk. But people crave leaders that have audacious goals in mind and are willing to do the work to bring them to life. You were just talking about that. And so collectively, and I say that word with great intention, collectively, because it's a leader's obligation to state the mission and then to invite everyone on their team to the table to identify the best way to achieve that mission. Collectively, we figured out slowly what unreasonable hospitality meant. And we started by really interrogating the experience, isolating every single touch point in the experience, and elevating as many of them as possible. By the way, quick piece of advice. At a certain point, look at your business and interrogate every single touch point between you and your customer. I guarantee you there's a bunch that you have yet to actually pause for long enough to consider. And if you can identify all of them and make each one a little bit more awesome, the impact on the experience as a whole is transformational. But it was about a year and a half after that first awards. I was in the dining room on a busier than normal lunch service when I found myself clearing appetizers from a table of 4 foodies. And there were 4 people from Europe on vacation in New York just to eat at restaurants. And this was their last meal. They were going to the airport to head back home afterwards. And I overheard them talking, and they were going on about what an amazing trip. One said, "My gosh, we went to Le Bernardin, Per Se, Danielle, Momofuku. These are all the best restaurants in the city. And now 11 Madison Park." But then a woman jumped in and said, "Yeah, but you know what? We never had a hot dog from one of the street carts." You know those light bulb moments in a cartoon where you know the character has a really good idea? I walked as calmly as I could back to the kitchen. I dropped off the plates and then literally ran outside of the hot dog cart, bought a hot dog, ran back inside. Then came the hard part, was convincing my chef to serve it in our fancy restaurant.
Was it really challenging? Was it really like, I'm not going to do it? Well,
For sure. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. He's like, I'm one of the great chefs in America. You want me to serve a freaking hot dog? But I asked him to trust me, which, by the way, was an important word in our world. If you are lucky enough to work alongside other people who are like-minded and like you want to be the best at what you do, invariably there will be tension. Because while everyone will or may agree on what it means to be the best, they won't agree on how to get there. And when a lot of passionate people disagree on how to achieve their biggest dreams, tension starts to be pretty intense. People have a tendency to lean away from tension. It's uncomfortable. I actually believe we should all lean into tension because A, it's something to celebrate. You are one of the lucky ones that works alongside other people that care. B, navigating through tension often yields the best result. But one of our rules was if we couldn't figure out how to get the other person to agree, either person could say, "This is important to me," and that was the end of the conversation. With the underlying rule that no one could ever overuse the "this is important to me" card.
Not every decision can be, "this is important."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I said, "This is important to me." And he cut the hot dog up into 4 perfect pieces, added a little swish of ketchup and mustard and a little scoop of sauerkraut and relish. We made it look super fancy. And before their final savory course, which at the time was a honey lavender glazed Muscovy duck that had been dry aged for 2 weeks, I brought out what we in New York call a dirty water dog. And I explained it. I said, "I want to make sure you don't go home with any culinary regrets. Here's your New York hot dog." And they freaked out. You know, athletes always go to the tapes and they've had a bad game to see what they did wrong. None of us often enough go to the tapes when we've had a good game to see what we did right, to make sure we keep on doing that thing. That's how you put intention to intuition. That's how you take these moments of fleeting brilliance in your organization and grab onto them and hold onto them and put a system behind them to make sure they keep on happening. So I studied the hot dog, and it required 3 things. Being present, which in hospitality is everything. It's kind of like a woo-woo term right now, but so many of us have such long to-do lists that we don't have the ability to slow down for long enough to actually listen to the people around us, what they're saying and all the things they're not saying. Second, it required this idea of taking what you do seriously. Obviously, you need to be great at anything, but we all need to stop taking ourselves so seriously. Too often in customer service, we let our self-imposed standards get in the way of us giving the people around us the things that will bring them real joy. A hot dog in a 4-star restaurant is sacrilegious until you look at how it made them feel. Brands are beautiful things. They're your bumper stickers to the world. But if suddenly the brand starts telling you what you are and are not allowed to do, you've let the balance get out of whack. And third, this notion that hospitality is about making people feel seen. Seen. People want to feel seen. That's what hospitality is. And if that's the case, the best way to do it is not to treat people like a commodity, but a unique individual. I genuinely believe I could have given that table a vintage bottle of champagne or a big pile of caviar. It would not have had the same impact as the hot dog because it would not have been specific to them. In unreasonable hospitality, one size fits one. The greatest gestures are specific to the person receiving them. So now we had this roadmap. And with the team, we got fired up when we started pursuing it, so much so that we hired an additional person onto the team whose only job was to help everyone on the team bring their ideas to life. I gave the team permission to go out into the dining room, to be present with their guests, not to take themselves too seriously, and come up with these one-size-fits-one gestures. And then I gave them the resources to bring their ideas to life. And to your point, the stuff we did was wild. There was a guest, a business guy on business in New York who was on his way, again, to the airport after his meal, and he griped to his friends that he had forgotten to buy his daughter the one thing she asked for, the little teddy bear with the I Heart NY shirt. Easy. The Dreamweaver, that's what we called the position that was there to support everyone else, after the iconic song by Gary Wright, which happens to be the song that was playing the first time I French kissed a girl. Ran up the street to one of those souvenir stores, bought a teddy bear, came back. This guy on his way out, a grown-ass professional businessman, starts crying on his way out the door. We did bigger things that cost a little more money. There was a family of 4 from Spain with their 2 kids. We had these big windows. It started snowing. We realized it was the kids' first time seeing real snow. Dreamweavers somehow found a store still open at 8 o'clock on a Friday night selling sleds. When they left, there was an Uber SUV with the sleds to take them to Central Park. Or really, really big things that were free. One time there was a couple dining with us. They had just gotten married at City Hall. They had like a big, big wedding plan, but their families fell out of love and they canceled it. The server, on her own, committed herself to, over the course of their meal, figuring out what their wedding song would have been. And we spaced out their meal such that they were the last people in the room. And at the end of the meal, we brought them up to our private dining rooms where the entire staff just decided to stay a little bit later, and we had a party. We poured wine for our entire team, put on some music. When the couple walked in, on cue, we put on their wedding song. We had given them the gift of their first dance. We loved this stuff, right? And we wanted more of it because it was working. Our food was some of the best in the world. Our product was as close to perfect as possible. And yet no dish that we ever served left the lasting impression that these gestures of hospitality were leaving. Here's the problem with the things I was just talking to you about, though. They're responsive, right? You need to pick up on something that someone says and then turn around and do something with it. And you can't force them, otherwise they feel contrived. And so I said, how do we systemize this stuff? And so what we did was we closed the restaurant for a day, and I encourage everyone in every business to do what I am about to say we did. We got our entire team together. Me as the owner, all the way down to the dishwashers. The reason for that is in most organizations, this is a quote by a former naval officer, David Marquet. In most organizations, the people at the top have all of the authority and none of the information, and the people on the front line have all of the information and none of the authority. We all need to do a better job of bridging that gap. And we did something that I now call pattern recognition of recurring moments. We all got together and brainstormed for the first half of the day, what are the things that just happen a lot? Things that if we were more well-equipped and prepared, we could respond to these things in amazing ways. Things like a guest going outside of the restaurant to smoke a cigarette in the middle of their meal, someone being on their way to the airport, someone drinking a little bit too much and complaining that they're going to have a hangover, or maybe my favorite, people get engaged at the restaurant. And once we had come up with a bunch of those recurring moments, we decided to prepare in advance for how we were going to make those moments more awesome. We cleared out a closet in the back. We called it the toolkit closet. And in it, we filled the thing with stuff that we made in advance such that our team could easily deploy gestures. People got engaged at raise your hand if you got engaged at a restaurant. Okay. So I imagine they poured you free champagne. If they didn't, sorry, you got engaged at the wrong restaurant. We did that too. Once my team and I had isolated that as a recurring moment, we started brainstorming, how do we make it astronomically memorable? Tiffany and Co., their offices were across the park. I went over there and started knocking on doors and found the chief marketing officer and convinced her to give us 1,000 of the baby blue boxes, each with 2 champagne flutes in them. Next time someone got engaged, all the server needed to do was walk back into the closet, grab that box, take out the 2 glasses. We poured them free champagne like they would have always gotten, but what they wouldn't have noticed right away was that their champagne flutes were a little different than everyone else's in the room. When they finished the champagne, took the glasses back, washed them, dried them, put them back in the box, and then on their way out of the restaurant, we'd give them those flutes saying, congratulations, and thank you for trusting us with this day. Didn't cost us anything. Cost Tiffany quite a bit of money, but I'm certain they more than made up for that investment.
Of course.
And I'll tell you, whatever dish they had, the story they were going to talk about were those flutes. Those flutes would remain in their lives. They felt great, and here's the coolest part. My staff felt so good because there is nothing more energizing than seeing the look on someone else's face when they receive a gift you're responsible for giving them. We had systemized this idea of giving our entire team the gift of being able to give other people gifts. And I think that's one of the best things you can do to increase retention, decrease turnover.
First of all, I got make some noise, guys. This is absolutely fascinating. I have 9 additional questions that I just wrote out outside of what I already have prepared for, but let me see which one I want to go with. Okay, so one, would you consider yourself, the day when you said, we're going to be number 1, and we're going to build this, and you came back and sold them, and it took 7 years before you became number 1, what was your sequencing personally? So if I'm watching you, I'm kind of visualizing you being a strong operator. I see you as somebody that doesn't sit on conflicts. If it's conflicts, you'll address them immediately. I see you as a salesperson where you can sell your guys on the idea of this vision, not sales in a negative way, sales in a way, guys, here's what we're going to be doing if we go out there and do this. Rallying, bringing people together. But I also sense a level of high expectation where you, to be number 1, this isn't like we're going to be number 1 because it's happy-go-lucky every day and this kind of happens, right? There is the meetings behind as well. What I really want to learn from you is, how do you sell this idea of all of us working together? And then when you're selling this idea, not everybody's going to buy in. Do those people that don't fit the next phase, maybe they're good for a top 50 restaurant, but they're not made for a top, being number 1 restaurant, do they filter themselves out? Do you sit down with them and say, this is your last chance? Does the peer pressure of other people kind of get them to want to leave themselves? What is that evolution of you selling it to them and then making sure everybody buys in?
That's a great question. And I feel like this is something you and I might have in common. One of my strengths, which can also be a weakness sometimes, is I am really good at selling people on a vision. I can get people really fired up to want to do the same thing that I want to do. And a long time ago, I had to make this mental distinction to stop selling the team on the thing that I was trying to accomplish and instead invite them along to join me on the journey I wanted to go down. And I'll explain the distinction because it's very subtle. When you invite someone, you are giving them the grace to RSVP no. When you sell them, they feel pressured to want to not let you down and do everything they can to make you proud and be with you down that road. And so with every big change, anytime the stakes got higher and the workload got bigger, I'd always say, hey guys, this is what we're going to accomplish. And I'm going to make a couple promises. Everyone here is invited to the table to figure out how we're going to accomplish it. And I think that's really important. Just my view on leadership. Once upon a time, leadership was the guy that had the confidence and conviction to say, this is where we're going. People crave leadership. They would follow that person. Then maybe it was around like Simon Sinek and Start With Why. That wasn't enough. You also needed to inspire them to want to go there by explaining why they should. Now I don't think that's enough anymore. I think whether it's generationally or just simple evolution, people want to be told where they're going, inspired to want to go there, and invited to the table to help determine, even in the smallest of ways, how you are collectively going to get there. So I would always say, hey, we're going to decide together how we're going to accomplish it. Also, it is going to be really hard.
You're saying that to them.
Yes. Like, and that's an easy thing. Like, of course it's going to be hard. You want to be best in the world. It's not like Michael Phelps would wake up in the morning and be like, oh, like he'd get in the pool and start training. But when we accomplish it, it'll be one of the most satisfying feelings you'll ever have in your life. But if that's not for you, do yourself and the people around you the favor of opting out such that we don't have to sit down and opt you out. And I always say that, which there were like people on my team very close, the people that helped support me in our culture that always hated when I did that because I was always at the end of my big talks. Like, if you're not in, just leave. And they'd be like, you're kind of ending all these talks with a bit of a downer. But I believe that everyone deserves to work alongside other people that want to accomplish the same thing they do and will give all of themselves to accomplish it. And everyone also deserves to work in a position that is aligned to their own interests. And I think leaders, one of our greatest responsibilities is to show people the door when that is not true.
Powerful. So vision, why, at the table to help contribute. And if we get there, imagine how it's going to feel. But if you don't want to be there, go do whatever you want to do because you can't be. Do yourself a favor and get off the team. Okay, so conflicts, when it happens. That business is super fast. Like if I'm running a real estate shop, it's not super fast. You can still go and say, did you get the process stuff? Okay, did we get the funding? What are we doing? Can you call the bank? Can you call the client? Did we do the appraisal? It's a different pace, right? Restaurant is go, split second changes. Did you get it? Let's go, orders in, boom, all this stuff. Two different types of conflicts. A conflict that we debrief after the day, where we have time, ample time to sit down and talk to you about it, right? Talk to you about it. Hey, Mary, earlier what happened with you and Jack, that table, that client, table number 52, you went through XYZ. What happened there? We have time to address that conflict because the day is over with. It's midnight. We got time to talk about it. Then there's the conflict that's instant, that we have to make that decision right there. What is your approach to addressing those two conflicts in different ways?
So, I think a lot of the rules overlap between the two, but yes, there are distinct approaches. We talk about criticism in my company a lot because I think in this day and age, especially with so many companies struggling with staffing, people are so focused on praise that they're forgetting about the power of criticism. Just to be very clear, praise is affirmation, criticism is investment. There are very few things more powerful than being willing to step outside of your comfort zone for long enough to invest in someone else's growth. And if you're not criticizing your team in a thoughtful and constructive way, they are not going to grow.
Powerful, man.
But there are rules to do it thoughtfully. 1, criticize the behavior, not the person. 2, criticize in private, not in public. 3, don't be sarcastic with your criticism. And there's a few more that I really hold deep, and I can share them later. But The idea is, with praise and criticism, it needs to be done consistently. And so all day in every single service, I would probably issue 100, 150 small doses of praise and criticism. Because you think about this, to be the best, every single little detail counts. If someone turned the corner into the kitchen a little bit too wide and threatened to bump into someone that was coming out of the kitchen, I would just walk up to them and whisper in their ear, corner, which was just my reminding them what right looks like. If someone put a plate down in perfect unison with their colleagues such that that moment in the meal felt just effortless and beautiful, I would walk up to them and say, great drop. As long as you're not emotional in expressing little gestures of criticism, then the person on the receiving end is far less likely to become emotional when they receive them. And so that is the consistent part. But I think the biggest answer in either case is you just need to do it all the time. I think far too many leaders only address conflict or give criticism when they have the energy or the time or they're in the right mood. And if your team isn't sure when they're going to be criticized for an action and it's only dependent on your mood, then they don't know what right looks like. Consistency in both praise and criticism is one of the greatest superpowers any leader can have. There would also be the conflict with the guest, though, right? To your point.
Of course, yes.
And our biggest rule with them was perception is reality. I think when you're trying to be the best, you can stumble into being overly concerned about who's right and who's wrong. It's a natural tendency. The best example I have is this. You serve someone a steak that's medium rare. Just as a heads up, most people think that a steak cooked perfectly medium rare is rare. You're wrong. But plenty of guests will say, hey, this is rare. I asked for it medium rare. Now, if you're trying to be the best, you don't want the guest to think you messed up. And so someone's tendency, which is driven by the good thing, is to be like, well, this is actually medium rare, but I'll go cook it medium for you. What you've just done is tell the guests they're wrong. And you've built up a wall of shame that's going to make it that much more difficult to establish some level of genuine connection with that person. In those moments, I think it's always important to remember what you are actually trying to accomplish. In hospitality, being right is irrelevant. In those moments, all you need to do is say, absolutely, I'll fix it for you. People are much less concerned with you making a mistake than they are you making them feel shame. I think we need to stop being concerned about being right or being wrong in how we serve people. We just need to remember what we're here to do, which is to make people happy and put that at the top of the list.
So Will, I can listen to you all day because as an operator, I respect operators a lot. Sam Walton, when you read his book, Made in America, he talks about how the stories of how many times he would go travel worldwide to go to different markets to see what they were doing. He would take the tape measure and he would say, why are these guys' aisle closer, mine's wider, 6 inches. If I take 6 inches in my Walmart, I can add 3 more aisles. And if I add 3 more aisles, I can add more product and I could increase the sales. So it's like, okay, hey, over here, hey, yeah, I need help. Can somebody help me find the milk? Let me get one of my associates. I'm sorry, what did you just call your coworker? Associates. So you guys don't call each other coworkers or staff? No, we call them associates. Moving forward at Walmart, we're calling it, like he's taking all these notes, right? I'm assuming in restaurant, it's different if it's, insurance or digital media or pharma or anything. In restaurant, it's easy to size up your competition because you just go to a restaurant and you eat there, right? How much were you doing yourself and your teammates shopping to see how they were doing? And if you were shopping, maybe you can't shop in New York because they're all going to know who you are. Were you shopping in Paris? Were you shopping in Argentina, Buenos Aires? Were you shopping in certain places to kind of see what their structure was? Were you a big student of the game as well?
Oh my gosh. I would go out to a lot of restaurants and every single, in New York, they knew who I was. I was still there shopping their restaurant. And I was there to do 2 things. One, what are they doing better than we are? This is especially in the early years, because if someone was doing something better than me, I was just going to steal it, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Or what are they not doing well? Like, what am I struck by in a weakness of this restaurant. Because oftentimes when you go to, like for me, if I go to a really good restaurant and there's something about the experience that I was really let down by, it's pretty likely that I'm probably letting people down in that area too. So I think you can go and you shop and you study what they're doing well, and if they're doing it better than you, figure out how to make yours as good. And if they're doing something wrong, take a close look at your own operation, because you might be doing the same thing wrong. And that got us a really far way down the road, right? We were effectively curators for the first 5-6 years we were there, going around the world, studying all the restaurants, picking the things we liked from every restaurant, bringing them home, making them our own. But then one day we had this moment where we're like, hold on, if we're going to change the game, we need our own point of view. And the only way to get that is to start finding inspiration from industries outside of our own. My dad has this thing he's always said, keep your eyes peeled, which means that if you're walking through life with your eyes wide open, there's inspiration everywhere. And when we started doing it that way, that's when things really changed. I went to Rocky the Musical, which, surprise, was not on Broadway for very long, and was inspired by something they did, and it transformed my restaurant. I went to a barber shop, and something they did inspired a change at our restaurant. My point is, yes, you need to shop the competition constantly, even if you're the best in the world, because if you're not careful, you're going to wake up and someone's going to be better than you all of a sudden because you took your eye off the prize.
So if you could give a couple specifics, like I can tell you specifics when I went to meetings and I watched how they sat or what they were wearing or the way they introduced me or the way they greeted me or a script or what they said when I walked in or how they, asked us to sit, how they walked us to the table, or when I asked, hey, where's the restroom? Restroom's over there versus here. Let me walk you to the restroom. I'll take you to the restroom. These small little things that I noticed myself. Any examples of stuff you caught specific from a restaurant, whether it's here or elsewhere? And then the second part of the question with this is, when I go to restaurants, let's just say in Mexico, and I go to Harry's in Mexico, and it's on the water, and the service they give you, I watch. But then I go to a restaurant in France, and the service they give you there. Or, you go to a restaurant in Spain, or you go to a restaurant in New York versus LA, versus Vegas, versus Dubai. Are you also seeing the culture of how they serve in different countries and how different it is than ours?
For sure. Paris, they're rude. Mexico, they're friendly. Right?
I agree.
You can see the tendency. And by the way, everyone's changing and everyone's been inspired by other countries now. It's become much more international, and so that's not as consistently true. But okay, so I believe that anything that feels transactional feels inhospitable. I think that the greatest bastions of hospitality are those that feel like you're being welcomed to a friend's house for dinner. So there's a restaurant in Seattle called Canlis. I was there. I drove there. We had rented a car when we were there. Parked, went in, had an amazing meal. Was on my way out, and my car was just there. I realized they'd never actually given me a ticket. And I was like, my gosh, that's like a magic trick. Like, how did they do that? And it was really cool. For me, I know that seems maybe small and insignificant if you're not in my world, but for me, that was groundbreaking. Because that last moment of the meal, you've just had this amazing meal, and now you're giving a ticket, it's this transaction, now you're standing outside, you're waiting for 5 minutes for your car. It was just effortless, smooth, magical, perfect. In New York, we don't have cars, people aren't valet parking, but coat check. I went back to my team and said, we are not using tickets anymore for coat check. And the guy in charge of that department said, how are we going to do that? I said, I don't know, but I trust that you're going to figure it out. And he did. Because, by the way, the more you trust the people on your team, the more trustworthy they become, the more responsibility you give them, the more responsible they become. And it became like this amazing moment in the meal. People would be walking to the door, you'd see them fumbling around looking for their ticket, you'd realize they don't have one, and then my host would just be holding their jackets. It was this one last dose of magic at the end. There's this restaurant called Rayo's in New York. You guys probably know Rayo's tomato sauce that you buy in the supermarket. Rayo's, this Italian restaurant in Harlem, it's been there forever. There's no menu at Rayo's. This like classic, old school Italian-American guy comes up and says, hey, here's how it's gonna go. We're gonna do mozzarella, we're gonna do seafood salad, and then you can choose pasta, you can do this. I went there and I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm at like my Nona's house right now. This is so much more heartfelt and connective than the transaction of giving a menu to me and then me reading it. And so we stole it. And we did the exact same thing. Now, we made it our own. We weren't slinging pasta and meatballs. We were doing like 15-course tasting menus. But we figured out a way to remove the menus and make it a conversation. I went to this restaurant called Lambert's House of Throwed Rolls. Has anyone here ever heard of Lambert's House of Throwed Rolls? Okay, this is this classic like Southern restaurant. I was on a road trip. I love road trips. You talk about inspiration? Drive across the country one day. You'll find so much cool stuff in these towns that no one's thought about for years, and there's these little nuggets that you can grab onto. At Lambert's, big restaurant, everyone's having like chicken fried steak and whatever, and you're like wondering, when are you going to get bread? And then they push a cart to the front of the room, and everyone in the dining room starts raising their hands. And this guy starts throwing these rolls across the room like frickin' John Elway. And I was so inspired by that for two reasons. One, they'd taken, to my point about touch points, the simplest touch point. No one ever reinvented how you serve someone bread. And they made it such a spectacle that that's the reason why that restaurant is on the map. But two, for me, it proved that they had created a culture where they truly gave ideas a chance to breathe, regardless of how bad they might have seemed when they were first presented. Like, imagine that meeting. Like, hey, Dad, I have an idea. What if we throw the frickin' bread across the room? and yet, the dad didn't like smack his kid and tell him to like go back to his room. Like, they said, why do you think we should do that? How would we do that? And that restaurant is now famous in certain circles, not because of their food, because of that one thing. And I told that story in my staff meetings every day for a month after that, saying, I'm sure some of you have had ideas that you have self-edited because you thought they were too dumb to present. Going forward, there is never an idea that is too dumb to present. The way I say it to my team is never ruin a story with the facts. If anyone brings up an idea and someone immediately starts saying why that's not a good idea, that person's the actual one that did something wrong. In every bad idea, there's often a good idea right around the corner.
I love that. Fantastic. And I want to get into a couple other questions, but I want to wrap this segment up. So you cast a vision. I think you fly to UK, right? When you get top 50, I think it is in UK. And you're waiting for them to list the restaurants. All right, so the top 50 restaurants. Number 50, 11 Madison Park. You're like, wait a minute, what? At least put me 22 or 34 or wait to 50, right? Nothing worse than being 50 out of 50. But then you come back, produces the fire, you cast a vision, 7 years later, you become one. Walk us through the day when that actually happens, when you are one. What's the reaction? How did you celebrate? How did you celebrate with your team, but how did you celebrate privately by yourself? Maybe pops, wife. What was that dynamic like when the vision became a reality?
With the team, we went hard. And we trashed that restaurant one night. We were all there until 4 a.m. We threw a huge party. Questlove came and DJ'd. We had a whole thing. My belief system is when you're trying to accomplish big things and you push your team to work really, really hard, when you are given those moments of grace to celebrate your success, you better celebrate and play just as hard as you ask them to work in order to get there. By the way, though, we would also celebrate along the way during moments of disappointment. We threw our biggest parties on the days that we got the worst reviews. Because sometimes when you have a team of people that are really fired up and you get kicked in the groin, that's when your team actually needs to feel the togetherness that comes from celebration. There was someone who told me this line, drink your best bottles of wine on your worst days, not your best days. Your best days are already awesome. Don't waste a great bottle of wine on them. Use them to make your worst days better. So we celebrated hard as a team. And I always say that whether you're celebrating or feeling the weight of a moment of disappointment, give yourself fully to whatever emotion you're feeling for some measure of time, and then move on. Because if you celebrate an accomplishment or you lament a failure, for too long, then you're just living in the past and you're not looking forward to what you're going to try to do next, either to respond to that or to move forward from it. And so I'll tell you what we did. Like I got there in 2006. We became #1 in 2017. 11 years fully focused on this one idea. We gut renovated the restaurant. We started over again because there was nowhere left to go. We needed to start playing a new game.
What did it feel like privately, though, when you're by yourself? Because the feeling, I want to know feeling, you're by yourself, no one's around. You're in the car, you're driving, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. Is it like, what did we just freaking do? Oh my God, did you like that? They were that person that said it was not going to happen, this person that doubted us, that guy that quit, the investor that pulled out. Man, what is that feeling like? You versus you, nobody else.
Yeah. No one's ever asked me that before. I mean, you feel like you're floating over the world. It is the best feeling imaginable. It really is. Like when you give so much of yourself to the point where you're depleted and exhausted and beaten down and worn out, but the one thing that is compelling you to keep on pushing is the feeling of profound conviction that you have set a goal and you'll do whatever it frickin' takes to make sure that you follow through on the promise you've made to yourself and the team to accomplish that goal. And then one day suddenly you look up and you did it. Guys, there are few things better in this world than that feeling.
Love that. You know how sometimes you read a book and you say, wow, powerful book. I got a lot of things out of it that I can apply in my life. Sometimes you read a book and you are going through a journey with the writer. That's what I felt like when I was reading your book. And it gave me 3 feelings when I was reading it. One, I fell in love with the character and the characters in your life. One being your father, your mom, and you. You know, how you're kind of going through that entire journey. And I just talked about this briefly an hour and a half ago, and I said, I don't know why, but the people that, compete at the highest level and make it to the highest level, meaning #1 in their space, what they do, they typically have experienced unconditional love from 1 or 2 people in their lives. You and your dad, it's very obvious there's a great relationship, and your mom. And then the second one is they experience unbelievable pain from someone they loved. With your mom, what she went through, the wheelchair, paraplegic, can't get up to hug you, but is there. You promise you're going to get a college degree. You go to Cornell. She sees the graduation. She dies the next day after graduation. You're writing this. I'm like, oh my God, like my feeling. I'm like feeling for you going through it, right? So you got that unconditional love. You got that kind of a pain that's just a permanent pain that stays with you, that you can, kind of relive it. And as much as you don't want to relive it, you can go there. And then sometimes there's also these people that go to the highest level. They also ended up choosing the right enemy. An enemy isn't necessarily always a human being. It could be something you're dealing with yourself. It could be a challenge. It could be something you want to overcome. Where it gets you to that level. But do you feel the unconditional love you got from your dad, the unbelievable pain you experienced with your mom, where you kept your promise to her, and she went through the pain just to see her son keep the promise, and then later on choosing the enemy kind of got you to go through the pain by yourself, where in many cases you had so many different nights where you're like, I'm just going to throw in the towel. What's the big deal about being #1? You think that was a driver and that helped you out?
Oh my God. I mean, all 3. My dad, guys, he's my best friend. He's my dad. He's my mentor. My dad has been like really my biggest inspiration my entire life. Not just watching him as a leader, but to give context, if you don't know what he was saying, when I was 4, my mom was diagnosed with brain cancer. She got surgery, radiation treatment, wasn't very refined. By the time I was like 7, 8, she was a quadriplegic. My dad, the way that he worked in restaurants 12, 14 hours, was raising a kid basically alone and was a caretaker to a quadriplegic. And he did all of those 3 things at such an unbelievably high level and never once felt bad for himself. In fact, it was the joy that I could tell he was getting from being able to take care of the 2 of us that showed me firsthand how good it feels to take care of others. and then with my mom. And we were a team, right? I'm an only child, so I was cooking for my mom. I was helping to bathe my mom when I was like 12, 13 years old. And because my dad never felt bad for himself, I never felt bad for myself. And in fact, to the contrary, I felt lucky that I was the only person in my entire friend group that got to love his mother in that way. And that's how I knew that I wanted to spend my life loving other people in whatever way, shape, or form. My dad always says, adversity is a terrible thing to waste. You can't control what's thrown at you, but you can control how you react to it, how you use it to fuel your growth. My enemy, my dad was an amazing operator, amazing restaurant guy. He ran some of the great restaurants in America, but he was always an employee. And he was just getting ready to go off and start his own company when my mom got sick. And so he couldn't, like, her medical bills were so crazy that he had to stay with the company, with the health insurance plan. And so my enemy, I'm putting that word in quotes, was me saying, there is no frickin' way I am not going to fulfill the dream my dad had for himself. I'm going to fulfill it on our collective behalf.
It's felt when you read it.
Thank you.
It's felt when you read it. You know, when you finished your sit down with Rodolfo at MGM and you guys were speaking, it was just fun watching you guys because there was, you know, it was magnetic when you guys were speaking. And you came to the back and you and I talked and I said, Will, man, how you doing, man? What are you doing? And you're like, well, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Yeah, of course, you've sold a company, successful, financial free, you can do whatever you want to do. Speaking, you written a book that's done very well, that people are booking you, you want to go and do all this stuff. But I said, you know, can you get back and operate, man? Because I don't see you stepping away from operating. Like, when is the next time you're going to cut a check to run the next restaurant? Because if you are who I think you are after reading your book, you feel like you got to get back in the flipping ring and build the next big one. You know, it's kind of like that challenge because you're also young. So is there anything where, you know, the movie Billy Bean, I don't know if you've seen the Billy Bean, Moneyball, right? Yeah. Not Billy Bean, Moneyball, and you're watching, I relate to this guy, the way Brad Pitt plays the movie where he's kind of like, comes to the game. He's like, oh, they're making a comeback. Turn around. You should go back to the game, Dad. Don't worry. They're winning. You're going to be. And then boom, he leaves like, man, I can't watch the game because he's a perfectionist. Or even Jerry West would say, I can't watch the game because he sees the mistakes people make. As an operator, sure, you go to restaurants like, dude, we would have killed it. If I had this restaurant, if I had this, we would have done this, we would have done that. Do you get the itch now, even though you made it to the top, to say, I want to get back in the ring again?
So I want to say two things. First of all, we talk about how it feels when you become number one. Just think about how cool it is for me right now to hear Patrick Bet-David say that my book is that good. Like, dude, that feels really good.
No, it's not good. It's great, bro. Everybody, it's the best book I read. Your number one book I read the last 12 months. I said that to everybody.
And you, man, so I sold my company in 2019, right before COVID, not due to some prescient knowledge of the world's pending collapse. And then I had 2 kids, and I live up in the country, and life is like pretty great. And then you got in my head in Vegas. I'm serious. You really did get in my head. And I got back, and I got my team together, and I was like, guys, we have to build something again. And so, yeah, the answer is yes.
Good.
No, definitively. And when I get off work at 2 a.m, I'm going to start calling you on your cell phone.
I can't wait. I'll be your first guest when you open it up, man. We'll do a party at your restaurant when you do that.
Right on.
And that kind of matches the gift I'll give you here in a minute while we're going through it. But let me go through a couple different things, because not only are you a guy where you kind of saw that the industry changed your life, and it got a lot of your dreams to become a reality. But during COVID, 10% of all the restaurants went out of business, 70,000. It was a mess. You were involved. You were trying to work with Congress, some of the roles that you had there. And now we have a case study of what worked and what didn't work during COVID. A lot of people's lives were devastated in your space, in your industry, specifically restaurants. So based on what we learned, and you're in New York, so dynamics in New York are different than LA, than Illinois, than Miami, than Vegas, than this, than Texas. There's, politics that gets into play. There's a lot of things that gets into play. What did you learn about how we handled the restaurants, specifically your business during COVID, that matters to us. We need to go to restaurants. That's like a part of our life. Like we want to go spend time with some of our best memories are at restaurants. So what did you learn on how we can handle it differently if, God forbid, another one comes up?
Well, it's a great question. I have a friend who's a pastor in Washington State. And, in the beginning of COVID, we'd all get on those Zooms together without any agenda just because we were craving some connection to people that we love. We were on one of those, and he was sharing this prayer that a woman had kind of said in his church. I pray the things we're being forced to do today are things we choose to do tomorrow. Talking about the things that we were forced to do in COVID, like I heard you say it before I came out here, there are a lot of things that we were forced to do then that we really should work hard to hold on to in our lives now. And there were a lot of things I saw firsthand in restaurants that I will choose to do going forward. I think the biggest one is, in restaurants, before you try something new, the way the restaurant business works is you put a lot of money into something. You build a restaurant, you pour tons and tons and tons of cash. You make it as perfect as humanly possible, and then you open it to the world. And if it doesn't work, you've lost everything. You compare that to tech, right? Where there's just a beta. They build the minimal viable product, they put it out, and if it works, then they make it better. During COVID, out of necessity, restaurants were just doing whatever they could to stay alive. And actually, some of the most creative ideas I've seen out of our industry in a long time happened because people weren't overthinking things. Because that's the thing, when you pour a ton of money into a product, you have a tendency to overthink it because you don't want to lose that money, you don't want to fail. When the ramifications of failure are not as extreme, you sometimes don't ruin an idea by overthinking it.
What a point. So it's kind of like I'm trying to protect what I've already, so I play defense and I'm playing too careful versus, look, we're going to lose the whole thing anyway. Let's freaking let it rip. Let's go. Let's see if it's going to work out or not.
And everyone gave restaurants the grace to try silly things in a way that people have not historically given restaurants that grace.
What are some silly things that you saw? Like I remember I'd go to Manhattan Beach, and California had this thing where restaurants, you couldn't be in the inside, so they brought out the restaurant on the outside, and they put covers so you could eat outside, but you couldn't eat inside. What were some creative things you saw where you said, this was genius? I can't believe they came up with this.
I mean, there's a restaurateur named Steven Starr out of Philadelphia, and he has this Mexican restaurant in New York City called El Vez. And he just, everyone was ordering delivery. And so out of the same restaurant, in the same kitchen, he did a delivery-only burrito concept called Jackass Burritos. And it crushed. Now, this is what's so brilliant about that. One of the biggest expenses, without question, there's cost of food and wine, there's labor costs, then there's rent, and then there's everything else. Those are the three big ones. He had no rent. He was just using an underutilized part of a restaurant he was already paying rent for to launch a separate business. And that business is now taken off and is its own thing. That started becoming a thing where people are just launching second concepts out of real estate they already had. Because maybe they didn't want their food to suffer in being delivered, right? You order certain dishes, they're not the same if they deliver them. So let's just create the thing that does deliver well, give it a new brand, and let's just launch a brand for what? A few $1,000 that it costs to pay a graphic designer to come up with a logo. That's the kind of thing we saw over and over and over again. I saw all sorts of ingenuity, creativity. There's a restaurant in Seattle, the same place, the valet parking place, called Canlis, the most fine dining restaurant in Seattle. These guys, go on Canlis's Instagram page during COVID if you want to feel inspiration. They turned their parking lot into a burger shack. They turned it into a drive-in movie theater. They did virtual bingo. They did all this stuff. That restaurant, which was viewed by Seattle as being the stuffy place, is now beloved because they showed the city during a moment of adversity that they didn't take themselves too seriously, and they're not there to serve their own egos. They're there to serve the city around them.
Love that. I mean, it's almost, absolutely. You can make some noise for that.
Thank you.
Love it that we have to go through it to experience that level of creativity. Last question for you, and this is more, something that your dad worked hard, spent the money for mom, health, and then, you going to school, Cornell. Today, Cornell, if you want to go there for 4 years, is $351,000, give or take, right? Yeah. You're a parent, I'm a parent. you have the resources, but say if it's your parents who maybe don't have the same resources as maybe you have today, now that you've had a nice exit, or you've had a few exits, do you think today a four-year college is as valuable to pay this kind of money to go to? I'm curious to know what you'll say to that.
No, not if it doesn't change. And I've been thinking a lot about this. The increasing cost of college, the rise of artificial intelligence, and the decrease of, our collective understanding of the soft skills that actually allow us to be good human beings out in the world. If college, because listen, a lot of the stuff we teach at college, everyone says if you're using AI at college, you're cheating. And I'm like, no, you're not cheating if you use a calculator. Like, the world is changing. We need to change with it. And if we were to repurpose a lot of the stuff where we're teaching people to do stuff that, let's just name it, in 5 years we don't need to do anymore, and refocus that time and energy on teaching people once again how to genuinely interact with other people, which I think is one of the greatest superpowers so many people are lacking in this day and age, then maybe. But as it stands, I don't think it's essential.
Well, absolutely, yes. We are down to the